Sharon Collins had thought the worst part of tonight would be telling Deborah they couldn't afford the new medicine. She was wrong. When she missed her third payment to the loan sharks, they came to collect. They dragged her into a rain-soaked alley, shattered both her legs, and left her bleeding in the storm while her daughter screamed in her arms. Sharon begged the shadow moving toward her not to hurt her child. But Rodney Stidham had not come to hurt them. The Mafia boss who controlled the city's underworld had come to destroy every man who had laid a hand on a mother protecting her child. It was close to 11 p.m. in the industrial district, where Sharon worked her second job cleaning offices in a building that towered over empty streets and forgotten warehouses. The October rain hammered against the cracked pavement outside, relentless and cold, turning the gutters into rivers that swept trash and broken dreams toward the storm drains. Sharon wiped down the last desk on the third floor, her back aching from 8 hours of scrubbing, her mind already calculating the shortfall. Even with 2 jobs, she was $73 short of this week's payment. $73 that might as well have been $700. She glanced at the small photo in her wallet. Deborah's kindergarten picture, gap-toothed smile, eyes full of trust, and felt her chest tighten with the familiar weight of fear and failure. She had borrowed the money 6 months ago, when Deborah's fever spiked to 104, and the hospital wouldn't treat her without a deposit. The predatory lender in the back of the check-cashing store on 5th Street had smiled like a shark and told her not to worry, that mothers always found a way to pay. She should have known better. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what happened to people who borrowed from Marcus Webb and his crew. But when your child is burning up and the doctors are turning you away, you don't think about consequences. You think about survival. Sharon gathered her cleaning supplies, pulled on her thin jacket, and texted the babysitter that she was heading home. Deborah would be sleeping by now, curled up with the stuffed rabbit Sharon had found at a thrift store, its ear stitched back on with dental floss because new toys were luxuries they couldn't afford. Her apartment was 12 blocks away. She had walked this route every night for 3 months and never had any reason to be afraid. But tonight felt different. As she turned onto a narrow service street behind the industrial buildings, she heard the sound of a car engine, slow and deliberate, following at the pace of her footsteps. Sharon's hand tightened on her phone. She walked faster. The engine matched her speed. A voice cut through the rain, loud and mocking. "Sharon, where you running to? You got something for us?" She turned. 3 men climbed out of a black sedan, their faces half hidden by the rain and shadows. The one in front she recognized immediately. Marcus Webb's enforcer, Danny Riggs, 36 years old, a man whose reputation for brutality preceded him like a storm warning. Beside him stood 2 others she'd seen at the loan office, younger, hungrier, with the cruel eyes of men who enjoyed their work. 2 weeks earlier, she had begged Danny for more time, explaining about Deborah's follow-up appointments and the hours she'd lost when she got the flu. He had laughed and told her that excuses don't pay interest, that children were expensive investments, and maybe she should have thought about that before. She should have known they would come for her. "I don't have it yet," Sharon said, keeping her voice steady despite the terror climbing her throat. "I get paid Friday. I'll bring it all then, I swear." "You swore 3 weeks ago." Danny stepped closer, rain streaming off his leather jacket. "You think we're running a charity? You think your sob story about your kid makes you special?" "Please," Sharon's voice cracked. "My daughter is home alone with a babysitter. Let me go home. I'll get you the money." "Wrong answer." Danny's hand shot out, grabbing her arm and wrenching it hard. Sharon screamed, tried to pull away, but the other 2 moved to block her path. She fumbled for her phone to call 911, but a fist knocked it from her hand, sending it skittering across the wet pavement into a puddle where it sparked and died. "No, please, my daughter." They dragged her into a narrow alley that reeked of rotting garbage and engine oil. Sharon fought with everything she had, kicking, clawing, screaming until her voice echoed off the brick walls. But there were 3 of them, and she was exhausted from 16 hours of work, weak from skipping meals so Deborah could eat. Danny's boot came down on her left shin first. The crack echoed louder than her scream. Then the right leg. Another sickening snap that sent white-hot agony through her body so blinding she couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sob and beg. "Mommy!" The small voice cut through the rain. Sharon's blood turned to ice. Deborah stood at the mouth of the alley, soaked to the skin, her little face twisted in terror. The babysitter must have fallen asleep. Deborah must have woken up scared and somehow, impossibly, tracked her mother through the rain-dark streets. "Deborah, run!" Sharon screamed, but her daughter ran toward her instead, tiny hands reaching out. The men laughed. One of them grabbed Deborah by the back of her shirt. Sharon lunged forward on shattered legs, crawling through the filthy water, leaving a trail of blood, reaching for her child with hands that could barely move. "Don't touch her," she begged, her voice breaking into animal sounds. "Please, she's only 3. I'll do anything." Danny crouched down, his face close to Sharon's. "This is what happens when you don't pay. You remember this." They dropped Deborah beside her mother and walked away, their laughter swallowed by the storm. Sharon pulled her screaming daughter into her arms, holding her tight against her chest, trying to shield her from the rain and the cold and the horror of what just happened. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Bone scraped against bone. She collapsed back into the water, sobbing, clutching Deborah, unable to move, unable to protect, unable to do anything but wait to die in a dirty alley because she had dared to borrow money to save her child's life. "Help," she whispered into the rain, knowing no one would hear. "Help me, I can't walk." But then came another sound. Footsteps, heavier, slower, purposeful. Sharon tried to lift her head, her vision swimming with pain and tears. Through the downpour, she saw figures approaching. 4, 5, maybe more. A tall man in an expensive dark suit walked at the front, his broad shoulders cutting through the rain like a ship through waves. The others flanked him, moving with the practiced precision of soldiers. Sharon's arms tightened around Deborah. Not more of them. Please, not more. The man stopped at the edge of the alley, his face obscured by shadow. Then he stepped into the dim yellow glow of a distant streetlight, and Sharon's breath caught. She knew that face. Everyone in this part of the city knew that face. Rodney Stidham. The man they called the Architect because he built empires on foundations of loyalty and fear. The Mafia boss who controlled everything from the docks to the downtown clubs, whose word was law in the underworld, whose enemies simply disappeared. She had seen him once before, months ago, in the grocery store, buying flowers. She remembered thinking how strange it was. This dangerous man carefully selecting yellow roses, his movements gentle, his expression almost sad. Now he knelt beside her in the filth, his dark eyes taking in her shattered legs, her bruised face, the terrified child in her arms. His jaw tightened. Something cold and terrible moved behind his eyes. "Please," Sharon whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain, and Deborah's crying. "Don't hurt us. Please, she's just a baby." Rodney's expression softened. He reached out slowly, letting her see his hands were empty, and carefully brushed the wet hair from Deborah's face. The little girl hiccuped, her sobs quieting at the unexpected tenderness. "I'm not going to hurt you," Rodney said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "Either of you. What happened here?" "Loan sharks," Sharon managed. "I couldn't pay. My legs, I can't." "Shh." Rodney's hand moved to her shoulder, steadying her. "I've got you now, both of you." He stood and turned to the men behind him. His voice changed, dropping into something cold and absolute. "Find them. All 3. I want them in the warehouse within the hour. No excuses." One of the men stepped forward. "Boss, they work for—" "I know who they work for." Rodney cut him off. I'll deal with Marcus Webb myself. Now move." The men scattered into the night like shadows released from chains. Rodney turned back, to Sharon, already removing his suit jacket and draping it over Deborah's shivering body. He knelt again, this time sliding one arm carefully beneath Sharon's shoulders, the other under her knees. "This is going to hurt," he warned, "but I need to get you to a doctor. Can you hold on to your daughter?" Sharon nodded, biting back a scream as he lifted them both. The pain exploded through her legs, but Rodney moved with surprising care, his grip steady and sure. Deborah wrapped her small arms around Sharon's neck, and Sharon held her daughter against her heart, feeling the rapid flutter of her frightened pulse. "I've got a car 2 blocks over," Rodney said, moving through the rain with long, purposeful strides. "There's a private physician who owes me. He's the best in the city. He'll fix your legs." "I can't pay you," Sharon whispered. "I don't have anything. I'm not asking for payment." Rodney's voice was firm. "No one hurts a mother protecting her child. Not in my city." Sharon looked up at him through the rain streaming down her face, saw the fierce determination in his expression, the barely controlled rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. She should have been terrified. Everyone said Rodney Stidham was dangerous, ruthless, a man who solved problems with violence. But all she felt was a desperate, overwhelming relief that someone had come, that someone powerful enough to fight back had chosen to help her instead of hurt her. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping us?" Rodney's jaw clenched. His eyes grew distant, haunted. "Because I know what it's like to watch your mother get beaten for money she doesn't have," he said quietly. "And I was too small to stop it." They reached a black SUV. The driver opened the door without being told. Rodney gently placed Sharon and Deborah in the back seat, tucking his jacket tighter around them both. He climbed in beside them, and the car pulled smoothly into the rain-soaked night. Sharon let her head fall back against the leather seat, exhaustion and pain overwhelming her. Deborah had stopped crying, her fingers twisted in Sharon's shirt, her breathing finally evening out. "Thank you," Sharon whispered. Rodney didn't look at her. He stared out the window at the dark city rushing past, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Those men will never touch anyone again," he said. "I promise you that." The car turned onto a street lined with old brownstones, pulling up to a building with no sign, no indication of what lay inside. Rodney carried them through a private entrance where an older man in surgical scrubs waited, his face calm and professional, asking no questions, making no judgments. This was a world Sharon had only heard whispers about. A world where money and power moved in shadows, where debts were paid in ways that never saw a courtroom, where men like Rodney Stidham protected their own with absolute ruthlessness. As the doctor began examining her legs, as Deborah finally fell asleep on a chair, beside her, as Rodney stood watch by the door with that quiet, consuming fury still burning in his eyes, Sharon realized her life had just changed forever. She had thought the loan sharks were the worst thing that could happen to her. But Rodney Stidham was about to show her something far more dangerous. He was about to show her what happened when someone made the mistake of hurting someone he'd decided to protect. The doctor's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away Sharon's soaked jeans to reveal the damage beneath. She bit down on the leather strap he'd placed between her teeth, tasting salt and fear as he manipulated the shattered bones back into alignment. The pain was a living thing, white-hot and endless. But she couldn't scream because Deborah was sleeping just 10 feet away. And if her daughter woke to see her mother like this, broken, bleeding, being pieced back together like a doll, it would scar her forever. Rodney stood against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He hadn't left since they arrived. Every few minutes his eyes would flick to Deborah's sleeping form, then back to Sharon, as if reassuring himself they were both still breathing. The doctor spoke quietly as he worked, his voice clinical and detached. Both tibias fractured, the right fibula completely shattered. She'll need surgery, proper orthopedic care. This is just stabilization. Then arrange it, Rodney said. Tonight. Use the private surgical suite at St. Catherine's. Tell Dr. Morrison I'm calling in the favor he owes me. He's going to want to know. He's going to do what I ask without questions. Rodney's tone left no room for argument. Make the call. Sharon tried to speak around the leather strap, but only managed a muffled sound. The doctor glanced at her, then carefully removed it from her mouth. My daughter, Sharon gasped. I need to take her home. The babysitter. Your babysitter fell asleep and let a 3-year-old wander into the rain, Rodney said flatly. She won't be watching Deborah again, and you're not going anywhere until those legs are properly fixed. I don't even know you, Sharon's voice broke. I can't just… Why are you doing this? Rodney pushed off the wall and walked closer, his presence filling the small examination room. Up close, she could see the details her pain-fogged mind had missed before. The expensive cut of his suit, now ruined by rain and her blood. The silver ring on his right hand, engraved with initials she couldn't make out. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow, old and faded but still visible. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, with the kind of face that could shift from gentle to terrifying in a heartbeat. Because 27 years ago, he said quietly, I watched 3 men beat my mother to death over $200 she borrowed to buy me a winter coat. I was 8 years old, and I hid in the closet while it happened. I didn't come out until morning, when she was already cold. His jaw tightened. So when I see a mother trying to protect her child from the same animals who killed mine, I don't walk away. I end them. Sharon's throat closed. She saw the truth of it in his eyes, the weight of that memory he carried like armor. The doctor cleared his throat uncomfortably. I'll make the arrangements for surgery. She needs to stay immobile until then. Rodney nodded, then turned to the man standing silently by the door, the same lieutenant who had driven them here. Vincent, take the girl to the estate. Get Maria to prepare the blue bedroom, the one with 2 beds. Make sure the child has everything she needs. Clothes, toys, food. Whatever it takes to keep her calm and safe. Vincent stepped forward, and Sharon's hand shot out despite the agony it caused, reaching for her daughter. No, please, don't take her. She'll be right there when you wake up, Rodney said firmly, crouching down so he was eye level with Sharon. I'm not separating you, but you're about to go into surgery, and she doesn't need to see that. Vincent has 3 daughters of his own. He'll keep her safe until you can hold her again. Sharon looked at Vincent, saw the softness in his scarred face, the way he gently lifted the sleeping Deborah without waking her, cradling her against his chest like she was precious cargo. Still, every instinct screamed at her to fight, to refuse, to never let her baby out of her sight. I'll kill you if anything happens to her, Sharon whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't care who you are. I'll find a way. Rodney's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it reached his eyes. Good. That's the kind of mother who survives. Now let us fix your legs so you can walk again. Sharon woke to silk. That was her first coherent thought. The sheets beneath her were silk, smooth and cool against her skin, expensive in a way she'd never experienced. The second thought was pain, but it was distant now, muffled by whatever medication flowed through the IV in her arm. She forced her eyes open. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a bedroom that looked like something from a magazine she'd never be able to afford. Cream-colored walls, a crystal chandelier, furniture that was probably worth more than a year of her rent. And in the corner, curled up in a matching bed, Deborah slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of childhood dreams. She's been asleep for 6 hours, a voice said. Sharon's head snapped toward the sound, immediately regretting the movement as her whole body protested. Rodney sat in an armchair near the window, still wearing yesterday's clothes, now wrinkled and stained. He looked exhausted. "The surgery went well," he continued. "You have pins, plates, the works. Dr. Morrison says you'll walk again, but it's going to take time. Physical therapy, patience, pain." "Where am I?" Sharon's voice came out raspy. "My home, the East Wing. You and Deborah have this room for as long as you need it." Sharon tried to sit up, but her legs were immobilized in casts and braces. Panic clawed at her throat. "I need to get to work. I'll lose my jobs. I have rent due." "Your jobs are covered. I've spoken to both your employers. They've been told you had a family emergency and will be on medical leave. Your rent is paid through the end of the year." Rodney stood, moving to stand at the foot of her bed. "And the men who did this to you are no longer a problem." The way he said it made Sharon's blood run cold. "What does that mean?" "It means they won't hurt anyone ever again. Neither will Marcus Webb or anyone else in his organization." Rodney's expression was empty of mercy. "I don't make threats. I make promises." Sharon should have felt relief, but all she felt was a new kind of fear. She was in the home of a man who made people disappear, dependent on him for everything, unable to run even if she wanted to. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rodney studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "I want you to heal. I want your daughter to feel safe. And I want you to understand that while you're under my protection, nothing and no one will ever hurt you again." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Rest. Maria will bring food when you're ready. Deborah will wake soon, and she'll need to see you're all right." "Why are you doing this?" Sharon called after him. "What do you get out of it?" Rodney looked back at her, and for just a moment, she saw the 8-year-old boy hiding in the closet, unable to save his mother. "Redemption," he said simply, and then he was gone. Sharon woke to the sound of laughter. Not the forced, brittle kind that came from exhaustion and desperation, but real laughter, bright and innocent and impossible. She turned her head carefully, mindful of the dull ache that still radiated through her body, despite the medication. Through the open doorway connecting her room to the sitting area beyond, she could see them. Deborah sat cross-legged on a plush rug, surrounded by toys that hadn't been there yesterday. A wooden dollhouse with tiny furniture, stuffed animals that looked hand-stitched, picture books with gilded edges. And beside her, sitting on the floor in his shirt sleeves, with his expensive suit jacket draped over a nearby chair, was Rodney Stidham. "And then," Rodney was saying in a high-pitched, squeaky voice that made Deborah giggle, "the little mouse said to the big scary cat, 'You can't catch me, I'm too fast.'" He held up a small toy mouse, making it dance across the rug. "But the cat is bigger," Deborah protested, her eyes wide with concern. "Ah, but being big doesn't always mean winning." Rodney switched to a deep, growling voice for the cat. "Sometimes the small ones are braver, and bravery is the biggest thing of all." Sharon's throat tightened. This was the man people spoke about in whispers, the man whose name made grown men nervous. And he was sitting on the floor doing voice acting for her 3-year-old daughter like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Maria, the older woman who'd been checking on Sharon throughout the morning, appeared beside the bed with a knowing smile. "He's been with her since dawn," she said quietly, adjusting Sharon's pillows. "She woke up crying for you, and he went in before I could. 20 minutes later, they were playing like old friends." "I don't understand," Sharon whispered. "Mr. Stidham lost his mother when he was very young, and he never had children of his own." Maria's expression softened. "Some wounds never heal. They just find new ways to teach us kindness." Deborah's voice carried into the bedroom, bright with excitement. "Can Mommy hear the story?" "Let's go ask her," Rodney said. And a moment later they appeared in the doorway, Deborah clutching his hand with complete trust. Sharon's eyes burned. Her daughter, who was scared of strangers, who hid behind Sharon's legs at the grocery store, who took weeks to warm up to new babysitters, was holding hands with a Mafia boss like he was a favorite uncle. "Mommy!" Deborah climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of Sharon's casted legs the way Rodney must have taught her. "Mr. Rodney got me toys, and he does funny voices, and Maria made pancakes with chocolate chips." "I see that, baby." Sharon pulled her daughter close, breathing in the clean scent of her freshly washed hair. Someone had bathed her, dressed her in new pajamas that actually fit, braided her hair with a skill Sharon had never mastered. "Are you okay? You're not scared?" Deborah shook her head seriously. "Mr. Rodney said the bad men are gone forever and can't hurt us no more, and he said you're gonna get all better, and we can stay here until you can walk again." She leaned in close, whispering loudly, "He has a really big house, Mommy, like a castle." Rodney stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with that same unreadable expression. Sharon met his eyes over her daughter's head, trying to reconcile the gentle voice she'd heard minutes ago with the cold promise he'd made about making people disappear. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate but necessary. "For taking care of her." "She's easy to care for." Rodney's voice had returned to its usual low register. "She told me about her favorite color, purple, and that her birthday is in December, and that you make the best grilled cheese in the whole world even though the edges get a little burnt." Despite everything, Sharon felt her lips curve slightly. She's not supposed to tell people that last part. "Burnt edges are the best part," Rodney said seriously, and Deborah nodded with enthusiastic agreement. Maria appeared with a breakfast tray, setting it across Sharon's lap with practiced care. Real food, not hospital nutrition shakes, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than Sharon. Made in a day. "I'll take Miss Deborah to see the garden," Maria said, extending her hand. "There's a fountain with goldfish that she'll love." Deborah looked to Sharon for permission, her small face uncertain. Sharon nodded, kissing her forehead. "Go ahead, baby. I'll be right here when you get back." After they left, silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken questions. Rodney moved to the chair beside the bed, sitting down with the careful deliberation of a man who knew his presence could be intimidating. "You should eat," he said. "I should understand what's happening." Sharon's hands trembled as she reached for the coffee. "I should understand why a man like you is reading bedtime stories to my daughter and paying my rent and—" Her voice cracked. "I don't have anything to give you. I'm nobody. I clean offices and serve coffee, and I can barely keep my daughter fed. So why?" "I told you why." "That's not enough." Sharon set the coffee down, her eyes fierce despite the tears threatening to spill. "People don't just rescue strangers out of trauma and goodness, not in the real world. So what do you want? When does the bill come due?" Rodney was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze, waiting. "6 months ago," he said finally, "Deborah got sick. Tell me what happened." Sharon's defenses rose automatically. "Why?" "Because I want to understand how you ended up in that alley. And because you need to say it out loud to someone who won't judge you for the choices you made to save your daughter's life." Something in his tone, in the way he said it without pity or condescension, made the walls crack. Sharon took a shaky breath. She had bacterial meningitis. One day she was fine, the next she was burning up with a fever I couldn't break. I took her to the ER, but I don't have insurance. They wanted $1,200 up front just to see her. I had $43 in my checking account. The words came faster now, like poison she'd been holding in too long. They were going to turn us away. My baby was dying, and they were going to turn us away because I'm poor. Rodney's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. There was a social worker who pulled me aside. She gave me an address, told me about a man who gave emergency loans, no questions asked. I knew what it was. I'm not stupid. But what was I supposed to do? Let my daughter die because I was too proud to borrow from criminals? Sharon's voice broke. I signed papers I didn't read. I took money with interest rates that would bury me. And I did it because that was the only choice I had. It wasn't a choice, Rodney said quietly. It was extortion dressed up as charity. Men like Marcus Webb prey on desperation. They set up shop near hospitals for exactly that reason. I thought I could pay it back. I got the second job. I cut everything I could, but the interest kept climbing. Every week the number got bigger, and I got further behind. Sharon wiped her eyes angrily. And then they came to collect. Rodney leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. That loan? The original $1,200? Marcus Webb made that back in the first 2 months. Everything after was profit built on your suffering. That's not business. That's torture. Well, he's gone now. You made sure of that. I did. No apology. No justification. Just fact. Sharon looked at this man who had killed for her, who played with her daughter like family, who sat beside her bed listening to her story without judgment. I still don't understand you, she whispered. You will, Rodney said, standing. Rest now. Deborah will want to show you the goldfish when she gets back. He was almost to the door when Sharon called out, Rodney. He turned. What happened to your mother's killers? The men who beat her? His expression went cold and distant. They lived long, comfortable lives. No one ever made them pay. I was just a kid from the wrong neighborhood, and they were connected. Justice doesn't come for people like us unless we build it ourselves. He left before she could respond. But Sharon understood now. She understood why he'd come for her in that alley. Why he'd destroyed the loan sharks without hesitation. Why he was so gentle with Deborah. He was rewriting the story he couldn't change. And somehow, she and her daughter had become his second chance at saving someone. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Sharon learned the rhythms of Rodney's fortress, Maria's quiet morning visits with breakfast and medication, the physical therapist who came at noon to work Sharon's muscles and prevent atrophy, Deborah's laughter echoing through rooms too large for one small child to fill alone. And through it all, Rodney appeared and disappeared like a shadow, always present but never intrusive, reading to Deborah before bed, checking on Sharon's progress, ensuring they had everything they needed. But he never stayed long, never sat down to really talk. And the question Sharon couldn't shake, the one that kept her awake at night, staring at the ornate ceiling of her borrowed room, was the same one she'd asked before. Why? On the 4th night, she found him on the terrace. Sharon had managed to maneuver herself into the wheelchair the physical therapist insisted she use, determined to move beyond the confines of the bedroom that felt more like a gilded cage with each passing hour. Maria had taken Deborah to the kitchen for cookies and warm milk, leaving Sharon alone for the first time since the attack. She'd wheeled herself through the halls, taking in the expensive art on the walls, the hardwood floors that gleamed like dark water, the silence that only wealth could buy. The terrace doors had been open, gauzy curtains moving in the night breeze, and there he was. Rodney stood at the railing, his back to her, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. A glass of amber liquid sat untouched, beside him. He was so still he could have been a statue, something carved from stone and loss, and placed there to ward off the darkness. You should be resting, he said without turning around. I've been resting for 4 days. I needed to move. Sharon wheeled herself closer, stopping a few feet behind him. And I needed answers. You have answers. No, I have a story you gave me in pieces, a dead mother, a childhood trauma. But that's not the whole truth. Sharon's hands tightened on the wheelchair's armrests. I need to understand what I'm part of. What my daughter is part of. Because every day we stay here, we sink deeper into your world. And I don't even know what that world looks like. Rodney finally turned. In the moonlight, his face looked younger, more vulnerable, the hard edges softened by shadow. You want to know what I am. I want to know who you were before you became this. Sharon gestured at the estate around them, the empire built on blood and loyalty and fear. Because the man who reads bedtime stories to my daughter doesn't match the man who makes people disappear. For a long moment, Rodney said nothing. Then he picked up his glass, took a slow drink, and walked to the terrace table, pulling out a chair. He gestured for Sharon to join him. My mother's name was Catherine, he began, his voice low and distant. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, waiting tables at night, taking in laundry on weekends. My father left before I was born, so it was always just us. She used to sing while she folded clothes, old Irish songs her grandmother taught her. I thought we were rich because she always made sure I had new shoes for school and a cake on my birthday. Sharon rolled closer, drawn in despite herself. I was 8 when I got sick, pneumonia. She took me to the clinic, but they wanted money up front. Sound familiar? His laugh was bitter. She borrowed $200 from a man named Eugene Cross, a neighborhood loan shark who operated out of the back of a butcher shop. 20% interest per week. The math was designed to trap her. Sharon's chest tightened. She knew this story. She'd lived this story. She paid him back the $200 in a month, working herself to exhaustion. But with interest, she owed $300, then $4, then $5. It didn't matter how much she paid, the number kept growing. Rodney's hands clenched around his glass. 6 months later, Eugene came to collect, brought 2 of his men with him. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when they walked in. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of memory. My mother told them she needed more time, that I was starting 3rd grade and needed school supplies, that she'd pay double next week. Rodney's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way people speak when the pain is too sharp to feel. Eugene laughed, said she should have thought about that before she borrowed money to save a kid who'd probably grow up worthless anyway. Then he hit her. Sharon's hand went to her mouth. She told me to hide. I crawled under the table, pressed myself into the corner, and I watched through the chair legs as they beat my mother in our own kitchen. She didn't fight back, didn't scream, just covered her head with her arms and took it. I think she was afraid if she fought, they'd hurt me too. His voice cracked, just barely. When they left, she was still breathing, still conscious. She pulled herself across the floor and told me it was okay, that we'd be okay, that she just needed to rest for a bit. Rodney. She died 3 days later. Internal bleeding. By the time I convinced a neighbor to call for help, it was too late. He set the glass down with deliberate care. I was put into the system. Foster homes, group homes, street corners. I learned fast that the world doesn't save poor kids from bad men. It just watches them die and moves on. Sharon felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I was 17 when I found Eugene Cross. He was older, slower, still operating out of that same butcher shop, still destroying families over pennies and calling it business. Rodney met her eyes, and in that moment, Sharon saw the 8-year-old boy hiding under the table, helpless and terrified. I made him tell me the names of everyone who'd been there that night, and then I made sure none of them ever hurt anyone again. That's when you started building your empire. That's when I decided that power was the only thing that mattered, that if I was strong enough, rich enough, feared enough, I could rewrite the rules. I could be the one who made men like Eugene disappear instead of watching them thrive. He leaned back, his expression hardening again. So I built an empire on the same foundation they used: fear, money, violence. But I pointed it at the predators instead of the prey. Sharon understood now, completely. You're trying to save your mother, over and over again. I'm trying to make sure no other 8-year-old has to watch their mother die for the crime of loving them too much. Rodney stood, walking back to the railing. When I saw you in that alley, holding Deborah, begging those men to stop, I saw my mother, and I saw the child I used to be. Except this time I was strong enough to do something about it. Sharon wheeled herself to his side, looking out over the manicured gardens and the city lights beyond. That's why you listen without judgment. Why you understand the impossible choices. I lived them. He turned to her. You asked me what I want from you. The truth? I want to prove that sometimes the story can have a different ending. That mothers like mine, like you, don't have to die or break or disappear. That the powerful can use their power for something other than destruction. And the men you've killed, the people you've destroyed, that's justice? That's prevention. His eyes were hard. Every loan shark I eliminate means 10 families who won't have to make your choice. Every predator I remove means 100 women who won't end up in that alley. I don't apologize for the methods. I apologize that the world makes them necessary. Sharon sat with that, with the complexity of a man who'd built a criminal empire on the corpse of his childhood. A man who killed to protect, who terrorized to create safety, who'd found redemption in becoming exactly what he'd once feared. I'm sorry about your mother, she said finally. I'm sorry about yours, Rodney replied, surprising her. My mother's not dead. No, but you had to become her too young. Had to sacrifice everything to keep Deborah alive. That's its own kind of death. Losing yourself to save someone else. He looked at her directly. You don't have to do that anymore. Not while you're here. Sharon felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd kept locked and buried for years. I don't know how to accept help, she whispered. Then learn, Rodney said simply. Let this be the part of the story where you don't have to carry everything alone. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and rain. Somewhere inside, Deborah was laughing at something Maria said. And on the terrace, 2 people broken by the same system sat in comfortable silence, building the beginning of understanding from the rubble of their shared trauma. The pain was worse than the breaking. Sharon had thought nothing could hurt more than the moment the loan shark shattered her legs. She was wrong. The reconstruction was agony written in slow motion. Bones knitting themselves back together with surgical precision. Muscles relearning forgotten functions. Nerves screaming protests with every attempted movement. The physical therapist, a stern woman named Dr. Chen, showed no mercy. Again, Dr. Chen said, her hands supporting Sharon's weight as she tried to bear down on her left leg. 5 more seconds. You can do this. Sharon's entire body shook with the effort. Sweat poured down her face. The parallel bars she clung to might as well have been made of fire for all the comfort they provided. Her leg buckled. I can't, she gasped, tears of frustration burning her eyes. I can't do it. You can. Rodney's voice came from the doorway where he'd been standing for the past hour, silent but present. He walked forward, his footsteps measured and calm. Your bones are healed, your muscles remember. It's your fear that's holding you back. My fear? Sharon's voice cracked with anger and exhaustion. My fear is keeping me from walking? I'm trying so hard and it's not enough. Then try differently. He moved to stand in front of her, his dark eyes holding hers. Stop trying to walk the way you used to. That woman is gone. You're building someone new, someone stronger. Sharon wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to rage against the unfairness of a world that had taken her legs and expected her to be grateful for, the chance to rebuild them. But something in his steady gaze, in the absolute certainty of his belief, made her try again. This time, when her leg trembled and threatened to give out, Rodney's hand was there, warm and solid against her back, not supporting her weight, but reminding her she wasn't alone. She held for 6 seconds, then 7, then 10. When Dr. Chen finally told her to rest, Sharon collapsed back into the wheelchair, gasping and shaking. Rodney handed her a towel and a bottle of water without a word. then quietly left the room. It was always like that. He never stayed for the praise, never made her recovery about him. He was just there, a constant presence in the background of her rebuilding. The victories came in increments so small they felt meaningless until Sharon looked back and realized how far she'd traveled. 3 weeks after the surgery, she sat up in bed without assistance for the first time and found Deborah standing in the doorway, her small face lit with wonder. "You did it, Mommy." "I did, baby." Sharon opened her arms, and Deborah ran to her, careful not to bump the healing legs, pressing her face against Sharon's chest. That night, Deborah drew a picture in crayon. A stick figure woman standing upright, arms raised in triumph, surrounded by hearts. "Mommy walking," she'd labeled it in her careful preschool letters. Sharon taped it to the wall beside her bed, and every morning when the pain made her want to quit, she looked at that picture and remembered she wasn't doing this just for herself. 5 weeks in, Sharon stood for the first time. Not just bearing weight, but actually standing, both feet planted on the ground, Rodney's hands hovering near her waist in case she fell but not touching her. The room tilted and swayed. Her legs screamed. But for 15 seconds she stood. "There she is," Rodney said softly, and Sharon heard the pride in his voice, the recognition of a fellow survivor who'd clawed their way back from destruction. The mornings became their time. Sharon woke early, too keyed up with pain and frustration to sleep past dawn, and found that Rodney kept the same hours. She'd wheel herself to the kitchen where he'd be sitting at the counter, reading through documents and drinking coffee from a blue ceramic mug that looked out of place in his elegant hands. He always poured her a cup without asking, the way she liked it. More milk than coffee, 2 sugars. They rarely spoke during those first shared hours. Just sat in comfortable silence while the house slept and the city beyond the windows slowly woke. Sometimes Maria would find them there and shake her head with a knowing smile, as if watching something inevitable unfold. "What did you want to be?" Sharon asked one morning in the 8th week, the question surprising them both. "Before everything, before your mother died, what did 8-year-old Rodney dream about?" Rodney was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "A teacher. I wanted to be a teacher like Mr. Morrison, my 2nd grade teacher. He was kind, patient. He made me believe I was smart even though I came to school hungry and wore the same clothes 3 days in a row." Sharon's throat tightened. "You would have been a good teacher. Maybe in another life." He took a slow sip of coffee. "What about you? What did little Sharon dream about?" "A house." The answer came easily, a truth she rarely spoke aloud. "Not a big one. Just a small house with a yard where Deborah could play, a porch where I could drink coffee in the mornings, a kitchen with enough room for a real table where we could eat dinner together instead of on the couch in front of the TV." "That's not deferred," Rodney said. "That's still possible. Not on what I make cleaning offices. Maybe not on what you made before, but who says you have to go back to that?" He turned to look at her directly. "You're rebuilding yourself, Sharon. Why rebuild the same limitations?" The question haunted her through the morning's therapy session, through lunch with Deborah, through the afternoon when she managed 3 full steps before her legs gave out. Rodney caught her before she fell, his arms strong and sure, and for a moment they stood there, her weight against his chest, both of them breathing hard. "I've got you," he said. And Sharon realized he'd been saying that since the night in the alley. In 100 different ways, with actions more than words, he'd been telling her the same thing. "I've got you. You're not alone. You're worth saving." She stepped back carefully, testing her balance. "Again," she told Dr. Chen. "I want to try again." By week 12, Sharon could walk the length of the parallel bars. By week 14, she graduated to a walker. Each night, Deborah added to the gallery of drawings on the wall. Mommy with a walker, Mommy taking steps, Mommy standing tall. And each morning, Sharon and Rodney shared their coffee and their carefully guarded dreams, building something neither of them had words for yet. "Do you think people can really change?" Sharon asked one morning, as autumn light filtered through the kitchen windows. "Or do we just become better at hiding what we've always been?" Rodney considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I think trauma carves us into new shapes whether we want it or not. The question isn't whether we change, it's whether we get to choose what we become after the breaking." Sharon looked at her hands, scarred from the alley, strengthened from months of physical therapy. "I used to be so ashamed of needing help, of not being able to do everything alone. And now? Now I'm learning that accepting help isn't the same as accepting defeat." She met his eyes. "You taught me that." Something shifted in Rodney's expression, a softness breaking through the careful control. "You taught me that some things are worth protecting even when it's dangerous, even when it changes you." Outside, Deborah's laughter drifted in from the garden where Maria was teaching her to feed the goldfish. Inside, two broken people sat in the morning light, healing each other in ways neither had thought possible, building toward a future that looked nothing like the past they'd survived. Sharon found the newspaper on the kitchen counter, folded open to page 7. The headline was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. "Local loan operation shut down following federal investigation." Below it, 3 names she recognized: Danny Riggs, Marcus Webb, and a third man whose face she remembered from the alley, young and cruel and laughing while she begged. All 3 listed as missing. Last seen 3 months ago. No leads, no bodies, no answers. The date of their disappearance was October 15th, the night Rodney found her bleeding in the rain. Her hands shook as she read the article again, slower this time, catching details she'd missed. The federal investigation mentioned witness testimony from other victims, families who'd been terrorized by Webb's operation for years. Bank accounts frozen, properties seized, a network of predatory lending that stretched across 5 states, finally dismantled. But the 3 men at the center of it had simply vanished into the night like smoke. Sharon heard Rodney's footsteps behind her, measured and unhurried. He didn't try to hide the newspaper or change the subject. He simply poured himself coffee and waited. "Did you kill them?" The question came out flat, stripped of emotion. "Yes." No hesitation, no justification, just the truth, offered without apology. Sharon set the paper down carefully, as if it might shatter. "All 3 of them. All 3. And 4 others in Webb's organization, who knew what they were doing and did it anyway." Rodney leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful. "They're buried where no one will ever find them." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Sharon gripped the edge of the counter, her healing legs trembling with the urge to run, even though she still couldn't move fast enough to escape anything. "You murdered 7 people because of me. I executed 7 predators because they made a career of destroying families. You weren't their first victim, Sharon. You were just the last." "That's not justice." The words burst out of her, sharp and accusing. "That's not how the law works. That's not... You had no right." "The law?" Rodney's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "The law that let Eugene Cross beat my mother to death and walk away free? The law that turned you away from the hospital when your daughter was dying? The law that allows men like Webb to operate for years because they're careful about paperwork and political donations?" He set his mug down with deliberate care. "Tell me about this law you believe in, Sharon. Where was it when you needed it?" She flinched as if he'd struck her. "That doesn't give you the right to be judge and executioner. No, it gives me the responsibility." He moved closer, and Sharon forced herself not to back away. "Those men hurt you because they believed there would be no consequences. They've been doing it for a decade because they were right, until they weren't. So you just decide who lives and who dies? You appoint yourself God?" I appoint myself the last line of defense for people the system has already failed. Rodney's jaw tightened. Do you know how many families Webb destroyed? 37 that we could document. 37 mothers and fathers who borrowed money for medical bills, for rent, for keeping their children fed, and ended up losing everything. 3 committed suicide. 1 lost custody of her kids. A dozen more are still trapped in debt they'll never escape. Sharon's throat closed. She thought of all those families, all those desperate choices, all that suffering. But you ended it, she said quietly. I ended it. And now those families are free. The federal investigation I arranged is unwinding every predatory contract Webb ever wrote. People are getting their lives back. He paused. Tell me that's not worth 7 evil men disappearing into the dark. It's not about worth, Sharon's voice cracked with frustration. It's about what it makes you, what it makes me for accepting your help. It makes me a killer. I've never pretended otherwise. Rodney's expression softened slightly. But what does it make you? A woman who's grateful her daughter is safe? A mother who accepted protection when she needed it? That doesn't compromise your morals, Sharon. That makes you human. I can't. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to organize thoughts that kept sliding away. I can't be okay with murder, even if they deserved it, even if it saved other people. That's not who I am. I'm not asking you to be okay with it. Rodney's voice was gentle now, almost sad. I'm asking if you can accept that some people only understand one language, that there are men in this world who will keep hurting others until someone makes them stop permanently. Sharon looked at him, really looked at him, the man who'd carried her through the rain, who read bedtime stories to Deborah with different voices for every character, who sat with her through months of painful therapy, believing she'd walk again when she couldn't believe it herself, who'd killed 7 people without hesitation to protect her and destroy a system that preyed on desperation. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know if I can reconcile those 2 versions of you. Neither do I, most days. Rodney's smile was bitter. But I stopped trying to be a good man a long time ago. I settled for being an effective one. That's not enough. It's all I have. He turned toward the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. I built my empire on violence because that's the only currency men like Webb respect. I've destroyed people who hurt the vulnerable because the law won't, and I'll keep doing it because someone has to. Sharon moved to stand beside him, her walker making soft clicking sounds against the floor. They stood in silence, watching Deborah play in the garden with Maria, the little girl's laughter carrying through the open window, like proof that innocence could survive even in proximity to darkness. Those families you saved, Sharon said finally. The ones trapped in Webb's debt. You really freed them? Every single one. The federal investigation will make it official, but I've already bought out their contracts and forgiven the amounts. They don't know it was me. They just know they're free. And the 3 who killed themselves? Their families received anonymous donations, college funds for their children, enough to rebuild. Rodney's hands clenched into fists. It doesn't bring them back. But it's something. Sharon felt tears sliding down her cheeks. You're trying to save all of them, everyone who reminds you of your mother. And failing most of the time, but I try anyway. She reached out, her hand finding his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. I can't forgive what you did. I can't say it was right or good or justified. I know. But I can accept that you did it believing it was necessary, that you used your power to protect people who had no one else. She took a shaky breath. I can accept that the world isn't simple and neither are you, and that sometimes the person who saves you is also the person who scares you. Rodney turned to look at her, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. Is that enough? For you to stay? Sharon thought about her daughter, safe and happy and loved, about the families freed from predatory debt, about the man who'd murdered to protect her and refused to apologize for it. about the impossible choices mothers make and the prices people pay for survival. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me again when I can walk out that door on my own 2 feet, when staying is a choice instead of necessity. Fair enough. Rodney's lips curved slightly. But Sharon. Yes? When that day comes, I hope you choose to stay anyway. He left her alone with the newspaper and her complicated thoughts, and Sharon read the article one more time, memorizing the names of the missing men and the families they'd destroyed, trying to find her own answer to the question of whether some violence could be righteous, whether some killers could be protectors, whether justice looked different when the law had already failed. The cane felt like freedom. Sharon stood in front of the full-length mirror in her room, weight balanced on both legs, the polished wooden cane in her right hand more for reassurance than necessity. 5 months since the alley. 5 months of pain and frustration and small victories that added up to this moment, standing alone, steady, whole. Look, Mommy, you're so tall. Deborah bounced on the bed behind her, her gap-toothed grin reflected in the mirror. Sharon turned slowly, testing her balance, and walked the 6 steps to her daughter without the walker, without help, without fear. When she reached the bed, Deborah threw her arms around Sharon's waist and squeezed tight. I told you, Deborah said solemnly. I told you in my pictures you'd walk again. You did, baby. You were right all along. Sharon kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of the expensive shampoo Maria bought, the security of a child who no longer flinched at unexpected sounds or woke up crying in the night. Rodney's fortress had given them both time to heal, and Sharon was finally ready to take the next step, whatever that meant. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Rodney stood in the doorway, dressed in one of his impeccable suits, but his expression was unguarded, almost boyish with pleasure. Dr. Chen told me you graduated from the Walker this morning. I had to see for myself, Sharon demonstrated, walking across the room and back, her movements still careful but growing more confident with each step. She says another month and I won't need the cane either. I'll be as good as new. Better than new, Rodney corrected. You've rebuilt yourself stronger than before. Does this mean we can go home now? The question came out before Sharon could stop it, and she immediately saw Deborah's face fall. Home. Their tiny apartment with the broken heater and the neighbors who fought through the walls. The jobs that barely covered rent. The life they'd been living before the alley changed everything. Rodney's expression didn't change. You can go wherever you want. You always could. But I have something I want to show you first, if you're up for a short drive. 20 minutes later, Sharon sat in the back of Rodney's SUV with Deborah pressed against her side, watching the city slide past the tinted windows. They drove through neighborhoods she recognized, working-class streets where people like her struggled and survived, until Vincent pulled up in front of a 3-story brick building with fresh paint and new windows. What is this? Sharon asked as Rodney helped her out of the car. Your next chapter, if you want it. He led her to the front entrance where a brass plaque gleamed in the afternoon sun. The Catherine Stidham Community Center. Sharon's breath caught. Your mother's name. She would have wanted it used for something good. Rodney unlocked the door and gestured for her to enter. The interior took Sharon's breath away. The first floor held a bright, welcoming reception area, offices with glass walls, and a large community room with tables and chairs. The second floor featured a computer lab, a children's playroom filled with toys and books, and several private counseling spaces. The third floor housed a small medical clinic with examination rooms and a pharmacy. It's beautiful, Sharon whispered, walking slowly through the space, her cane tapping against the polished floors. But I don't understand. Why are you showing me this? Rodney stopped in the center of the community room, his hands in his pockets. Because I want you to run it. Sharon froze. What? A support center for struggling single parents, free financial counseling to help people avoid predatory loans, a medical clinic that treats children regardless of ability to pay, job training programs, childcare assistance, everything you needed and couldn't find when Deborah got sick. He turned to face her fully. I'm funding it. You're designing the programs and running the operation. I clean offices, Rodney. I serve coffee. I don't know anything about running a community center. You know everything that matters. You know what it's like to choose between rent and medicine. You know how it feels to beg for help and be turned away. You know which programs actually help, and which ones are just bureaucratic barriers designed to keep poor people poor. His voice was firm, absolute. You've lived what these families are going through. That makes you more qualified than any social worker with a degree and no experience. Sharon felt tears burning her eyes. This is too much. I can't. You can, and you will. Because this isn't charity, Sharon. This is justice. Rodney moved closer, his expression intense. Every family we help here is a family that won't end up in the hands of men like Marcus Webb. Every child who gets treated is a child whose parent won't have to make the choice you made. You want to reconcile who I am with what I do? This is how. We take the resources I've built through violence and we transform them into protection. Deborah had wandered into the playroom and was squealing with delight over a miniature kitchen set. Sharon watched her daughter play, safe and happy, and utterly unaware of the magnitude of what Rodney was offering. You're giving me purpose, Sharon said quietly. Beyond just surviving. Beyond just being grateful I'm alive. I'm giving you power. The power to change the system that failed us both. Rodney's hand found hers, warm and steady. I can't undo what happened to my mother or what happened to you, but we can make sure fewer people have to live through those same nightmares. Sharon looked around the center again, seeing it differently now. Not as charity, but as warfare. A strategic strike against the poverty and desperation that fed the predators. Every family helped here was a victory. Every child treated was a life saved. Every parent who avoided a predatory loan was someone who wouldn't end up broken in an alley. When does it open? She asked. Rodney's smile was slow and genuine. Whenever you're ready, the building is finished, the funding is secured, we just need the right person to bring it to life. Sharon straightened, testing her weight on her healing legs, feeling the strength that 5 months of brutal recovery had built. She wasn't the same woman who'd been beaten in that alley. That woman had believed her only value was in how much pain she could endure alone. This woman understood that accepting help wasn't weakness, that building something with someone else wasn't surrender, that power could be shared and multiplied instead of hoarded. I'll need to hire staff. People who understand what these families are going through. I know several candidates, former clients who've rebuilt their lives and want to help others do the same. And the medical clinic needs to be staffed by real professionals, not just volunteers. Already arranged. Dr. Morrison has agreed to oversee it personally. Sharon turned to look at him, this complicated man who'd killed to protect her, and was now offering her the tools to protect others. This partnership, it doesn't absolve you of what you've done. I know, but it gives meaning to it, direction, purpose beyond revenge. She took a slow breath. I'll run your center, Rodney, but I do it my way. No violence, no shortcuts. We help people through legal means and genuine support. Agreed. He extended his hand. Partners? Sharon looked at his hand, thinking about all the blood on it, all the lives he'd ended and saved in equal measure. Then she thought about the families this center would help. The children who wouldn't have to watch their parents break under impossible pressure. The mothers who wouldn't have to choose between their children's lives and predatory debt. She took his hand. Partners. Deborah came running back from the playroom, her arms full of toy food. Mommy, can we stay here? This place is amazing. Sharon knelt down carefully, pulling her daughter close. Yes, baby. We're going to stay. And we're going to help lots of other mommies and kids who need a safe place too. As they walked through the center together, Rodney pointing out features, Sharon making mental notes, Deborah exploring every corner with boundless energy. Sharon felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just surviving. She was building, creating, transforming her trauma into something that would protect others. This was what becoming whole looked like. Not erasing the scars, but giving them meaning. Not forgetting the alley, but using it as fuel to light the way for others still trapped in the darkness. The community center buzzed with life. Sharon stood near the entrance, her palms damp with nerves, watching families stream through the doors. Single mothers holding toddlers on their hips, their eyes wary but hopeful. Fathers carrying paperwork from collection agencies, looking for a lifeline. Elderly couples who'd been trapped in predatory loans for decades, finally believing there might be a way out. Over 200 people had shown up for the grand opening of the Catherine Stidham Community Center, and Sharon was supposed to address them all in 10 minutes. No pressure. "You look terrified," Maria said, appearing beside her with a reassuring smile. She'd become the center's administrative coordinator, her decades of managing, Rodney's household translating seamlessly into organizing community programs. "I am terrified." Sharon glanced down at her outfit, a simple navy dress Rodney had insisted on buying her, paired with sensible flats that wouldn't compromise her still healing legs. No cane today. She'd left it deliberately behind, a statement to herself as much as anyone else. "What if I forget what to say? What if I mess up?" "Then you'll be human, and they'll love you for it." Maria squeezed her arm. "These people aren't here for a polished speech. They're here because they heard a single mother who survived the same hell they're living through is offering them a way forward. Your story is your credential." Through the crowd, Sharon spotted Dr. Morrison setting up the medical clinic, his experienced hands arranging supplies with the same care he'd used treating her shattered legs months ago. In the computer lab, Vincent was helping a teenage girl navigate an online job application, his scarred face gentle with patience. Even Dr. Chen was here, offering free physical therapy assessments in the back room. Everyone who'd helped rebuild Sharon was now helping rebuild others. And somewhere in the crowd, though she couldn't see him yet, was Rodney. He'd insisted on attending, but refused to sit on the stage or take any public credit. "This is your victory," he'd said that morning. "I'm just a man who wrote checks. You're the one who gave it a soul." The crowd settled into chairs arranged in the community room. Sharon caught sight of Deborah in the front row, sitting between Maria's daughter Rosa and another little girl, who'd already become her new best friend. Her daughter wore a purple dress and a smile that could light the whole city, holding up a hand-drawn sign that read, "Go Mommy," in crayon. Sharon's heart squeezed so tight she could barely breathe. A young woman approached the microphone on the small stage, introducing herself as the event coordinator. "And now, please welcome the director of the Catherine Stidham Community Center, a woman whose courage and resilience inspired this entire program, Sharon Collins." The applause was immediate and warm. Sharon's legs trembled, not from weakness now, but from the weight of the moment. She took her first step forward, then another, walking through the crowd without support, without hesitation. People shifted aside to let her pass, some reaching out to touch her arm in solidarity, others nodding with recognition of shared pain. Halfway to the stage, Sharon saw him. Rodney stood at the very back of the room, leaning against the wall in his dark suit, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Recognition, pride, gratitude, and something deeper that neither had yet named out loud. He nodded once, a small gesture that said everything. "I see you. I believe in you. Walk." Sharon climbed the 3 steps to the stage, each one a declaration of independence. When she reached the microphone, she gripped its stand not for support, but to ground herself in this moment, this impossible triumph. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I was lying in an alley with shattered legs, holding my 3-year-old daughter, convinced we were going to die there. I'd made the mistake of borrowing money from the wrong people to pay for my daughter's medical treatment. When I couldn't keep up with the interest payments, they came to collect in violence. The room was absolutely silent. Sharon could see women in the audience gripping their chairs, men nodding grimly, faces reflecting the same desperation she'd lived through. I thought that night was my ending, the moment where my story stopped and my daughter's trauma began. I thought I'd failed her by being poor, by being desperate, by not being strong enough to protect us both. Sharon's voice cracked, but she pushed through. I was wrong. That night wasn't my ending. It was the night I learned that accepting help isn't weakness, that community isn't charity, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't survive alone. She paused, letting the words settle. This center exists because I got lucky, because someone helped me when I needed it most. But luck shouldn't be the difference between survival and destruction. Resources shouldn't be reserved for people who happen to meet the right person at the right time. So we built this place, a place where the help I received becomes the help we all deserve. Free financial counseling to break predatory loan cycles. Medical care that doesn't require you to choose between your child's health and your rent. Job training that acknowledges your experience matters more than formal education. Child care so you can actually attend the programs we offer. Sharon's eyes found Deborah in the front row, her daughter watching with solemn attention, probably understanding only that Mommy was talking to lots of people and seemed important. This center is named after Catherine Stidham, a woman who died because she borrowed money to keep her child alive, a woman who deserved better than the system gave her. We can't save Catherine, we can't undo the past, but we can make sure her story doesn't keep repeating. Sharon's voice strengthened, filled with conviction born from months of pain and healing. We can create the world she deserved to live in, the world where mothers don't have to choose between their children and their survival, where asking for help is met with resources instead of predators, where being poor isn't a crime punishable by violence. The applause started softly, then grew, filling the room with sound that felt like validation, like solidarity, like hope. So welcome, Sharon continued, smiling through tears she no longer bothered to hide. Welcome to your community. Welcome to your second chance. Welcome to the place where we rebuild together, because that's the only way any of us make it through. As she stepped back from the microphone, the room erupted. People rose to their feet, clapping and crying and nodding with the fierce recognition of shared trauma. Sharon descended the stage carefully, her legs strong beneath her, and Deborah broke free from the front row and ran straight into her arms. For months, Sharon hadn't been able to lift her daughter. The physical therapy had focused on walking, on bearing her own weight, on the slow reconstruction of shattered bones. But now, as Deborah launched herself forward, Sharon caught her instinctively, lifting her daughter high, feeling the solid weight of her child in her arms. "You did it, Mommy!" Deborah squealed, wrapping her arms around Sharon's neck. "You walked on the stage all by yourself." "I did, baby. I did." Sharon buried her face in her daughter's hair, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of holding her, standing strong, being whole again. Over Deborah's shoulder, Sharon found Rodney in the crowd. He hadn't moved from his position at the back wall, but his expression had transformed. The hard lines she'd grown accustomed to had softened into something tender and unguarded. His eyes shone with emotion he didn't bother to hide. Pride, certainly, but also something that looked like redemption realized. Like the ghost of the 8-year-old boy who couldn't save his mother finally witnessing the salvation of someone else. He pressed his hand to his heart. A gesture so small and private it was meant only for her. Sharon smiled through her tears and mouthed 2 words across the crowded room. "Thank you." Rodney shook his head slightly, his lips forming a response she could read even at this distance. No, thank you. Around them, families moved toward the resource tables, beginning the work of rebuilding their lives. Volunteers guided them toward financial counselors and medical staff and job training coordinators. The center Sharon had designed was coming alive exactly as she'd imagined, a place where desperation met compassion, where survival became possible, where the cycle of poverty and predation finally found a breaking point. Sharon set Deborah down gently, took her daughter's hand, and walked through the center she now directed. Not as a victim being helped, but as a survivor helping others. Not as someone broken by the system, but as someone who'd learned to rebuild and was teaching others the same skill. She was no longer the woman who'd begged for help in a rain-soaked alley. She was the woman who'd learned to walk again, and in walking, had found her purpose. She was whole. The estate was quiet when they returned, the kind of silence that follows triumph and leaves space for truth. Deborah had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from the excitement of the grand opening, and Maria had carried her upstairs to bed with practiced gentleness. Sharon stood in the foyer, still wearing her navy dress, still feeling the phantom weight of her daughter in her arms, the echo of 200 people's hope reverberating through her chest. "You should be proud," Rodney said, loosening his tie as he walked toward the terrace doors. "What you built today, it's more than I could have imagined." "What we built," Sharon corrected, following him. "You provided the foundation. I just gave it direction." The November air was crisp but not cold, carrying the scent of the last autumn leaves and the distant promise of winter. The city sparkled below them, a constellation of lights where families they'd helped today were returning to homes that might, finally, feel a little safer. Rodney leaned against the railing, his profile sharp against the darkness. "When I bought that building, I thought I was creating a memorial, another monument to my mother, like all the others I've built trying to make sense of her death. But you transformed it into something alive, something that actually matters." Sharon moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth but not touching. "Not yet. Can I tell you something? Anything." 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here, walking on my own legs, running a community center, living in a mansion with a man who terrifies half the city, I would have thought they were insane. She turned to look at him directly. "But the insane part isn't any of that. The insane part is that I'm happy. For the first time since Deborah was born, maybe for the first time in my entire life, I wake up and feel something other than dread and exhaustion." Rodney's jaw tightened. "You deserve to be happy." "So do you." Sharon took a breath, steadying herself for the words she'd been holding back for weeks. "I'm falling in love with you, Rodney. And before you say anything, I need you to understand. I'm not in love with the man who saved me. I'm not confusing gratitude with affection or trauma bonding with real feeling. I'm falling in love with the man who does silly voices for my daughter, who brings me coffee exactly how I like it without asking, who believes in my ability to run a center even when I don't believe in myself, who sits with me in the quiet hours and doesn't feel the need to fill silence with empty words." "Sharon." His voice was rough, uncertain. "I'm also falling in love with the dangerous man," she continued, not letting him deflect. "The one who killed to protect me, who built an empire on violence and uses it to shield people the world has forgotten. I can't separate those versions of you anymore, and I've stopped trying. You're both, and I'm choosing both. Consciously, deliberately, without illusions about what that means." Rodney turned to face her fully, and in the dim light from the house, she could see the conflict warring in his expression. Hope and fear, and something that looked like disbelief. "I'm not a good man," he said quietly. "You know what I've done, what I'll continue to do. There's blood on my hands that will never wash clean. I know." Sharon stepped closer. "And I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm not asking you to stop protecting people or to pretend you're not dangerous. I'm asking if there's space in your life for something other than redemption through violence. For something that looks like love. I don't know how to love someone without destroying things on their behalf. His hands clenched at his sides, like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. Everything I touch eventually breaks or bleeds or both. Then maybe you need someone who's already been broken and bled and learned how to rebuild herself? Sharon took his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the tremor that betrayed his carefully maintained control. I'm not fragile, Rodney. I'm not going to shatter because you're complicated, or because your methods are brutal, or because loving you means accepting darkness along with light. I shattered 6 months ago in an alley. What you're looking at now is someone who chose to put herself back together stronger. Rodney stared at their joined hands, his thumb moving almost unconsciously across her knuckles. I've never believed in my own redemption. Never thought I deserved forgiveness for what I've become. But when you look at me, his voice broke slightly. When you look at me, I see myself as someone who might be worth saving. You don't need saving. Sharon lifted her free hand to his face, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You need someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. That's what I'm doing. Right now, I'm choosing you. The space between them collapsed like a held breath finally released. Rodney's arms came around her, careful at first, as if she might disappear or change her mind. But Sharon pressed closer, solid and certain, and his embrace tightened until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest, rapid and fierce. I love you, he said into her hair, the words raw and unpracticed. I've loved you since the moment you threatened to kill me if anything happened to Deborah. Since you looked at me with shattered legs and still had the courage to demand answers. Since you took everything broken about both of us and decided it was worth building something beautiful from the wreckage. Sharon pulled back just enough to see his face, to witness the vulnerability he showed so rarely. Then kiss me. Not as the man who saved me. Not as the protector or the provider or the crime boss everyone fears. Kiss me as Rodney. Just Rodney. The man I'm choosing to love. He lowered his mouth to hers slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, to step back, to reconsider. But Sharon rose on her heeled legs to meet him halfway. And when their lips finally touched, it felt nothing like gratitude or desperation or trauma. It felt like recognition. Like two people who'd survived separate hells finding each other in the aftermath and deciding to build something better together. The kiss deepened, unhurried and thorough, tasting of coffee and promise and new beginnings. Rodney's hand cradled the back of her head while Sharon's fingers gripped his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, to this choice, to this man who was equal parts salvation and damnation and completely, impossibly hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rodney rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not as a guest, not as someone I'm protecting. Stay as family, you and Deborah. Make this place a home instead of a fortress. Sharon smiled, her eyes bright with tears she didn't bother to hide. On one condition. Anything. Stop calling it your estate. If we're staying, it's our home. Shared, equal, no more protector and protected, just partners figuring out how to build a life together. Rodney's laugh was soft and genuine, the sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for months, finally allowing himself to hope. Partners. I can do that. Good. Sharon kissed him again, briefer this time but no less meaningful. Because Deborah's going to need her own room properly decorated, and that terrace needs furniture that's actually comfortable, and the kitchen needs more than coffee and expensive wine. If this is going to be our home, it needs to feel like people actually live here. Make a list. Change everything. I don't care what it looks like as long as you're both here. They stood together on the terrace as the night deepened. Two people who'd survived the worst the world could offer, and decided to build something better. Not perfect. Not uncomplicated. but real and chosen and filled with the kind of love that comes from truly seeing another person, scars and strength and everything in between, and choosing them anyway. Inside, Deborah slept peacefully, already home in a way she'd never been before. And Sharon, finally, let herself believe in futures that looked different from survival. She let herself believe in love. Spring arrived like a promise kept. Sharon stood in the community center's main room, addressing a group of 15 single mothers who'd gathered for the new self-defense workshop. Sunlight streamed through windows that had witnessed so many transformations over the past 6 months. Families freed from predatory debt, children receiving medical care that saved their lives, parents finding jobs that paid living wages instead of survival scraps. "The most important thing I want you to understand," Sharon said, demonstrating a basic blocking stance, "is that self-defense isn't about being strong enough to win a fight. It's about being prepared enough to escape one, about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, about knowing you have the right to take up space and defend it." She moved through the techniques slowly, her body strong and fluid. No trace of the shattered legs that had once defined her. The physical therapy had worked its magic, but the real healing had come from purpose. From waking up each morning knowing she was building something that mattered, that every day at this center meant another family wouldn't have to make the choices she'd been forced to make. "Can you show us the move again?" asked a young woman named Carmen, maybe 23, with a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup and a determination in her jaw that Sharon recognized from her own reflection a year ago. "Of course." Sharon walked Carmen through the defensive technique, correcting her stance, showing her where to place her weight. "The goal isn't to hurt him, the goal is to get away, to create enough space to run, to scream, to survive." Through the glass wall separating the main room from the children's play area, Sharon could see Deborah leading a group of kids in some elaborate game involving stuffed animals and a cardboard castle. Her daughter had grown 2 inches in 6 months, lost another tooth, and developed a fierce protective streak toward the younger children who came through the center. She was becoming the person Sharon had always hoped she'd be: confident, compassionate, unbroken by the trauma they'd survived together. The workshop ended an hour later, the women leaving with printed materials, emergency contact numbers, and something more valuable than either: the knowledge that they weren't alone, that someone who'd survived the same hell was fighting for them. Sharon was cleaning up the mats when she heard Deborah's excited squeal from the hallway. Mommy, come quick! There's a surprise!" She found her daughter bouncing with barely contained excitement in the center's lobby, holding Rodney's hand. He wore one of his expensive suits, but his expression was softer than it used to be, less guarded, like he'd finally allowed himself to believe in happiness. "What's all this about?" Sharon asked, brushing a strand of hair from Deborah's face. "Mr. Rodney has something to ask you," Deborah announced, then ruined any attempt at subtlety by adding, "He practiced with me last night, and I helped him pick the ring." Rodney shot the little girl an amused look. "So much for my careful planning?" Sharon's heart began to race. "Rodney?" He knelt down in the center's lobby, in the building that had become their shared mission, their joint redemption. From his pocket, he produced a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the afternoon light. "Sharon Collins," he began, and Sharon noticed his hands trembling slightly. This man who faced down criminals without flinching, now nervous before a woman he loved. "You've taught me that redemption isn't something you achieve alone in the dark, through violence and vengeance. It's something you build together, in the light, through protection and care and creating the world you wish had existed when you needed it most." Tears were already streaming down Sharon's face. "You took a man who believed his only value was in how much destruction he could cause, and showed him he could build instead. You took a fortress designed to keep everyone out and turned it into a home. You took my mother's name and gave it the legacy she deserved." His voice caught slightly. "Marry me. Not because I saved you, but because you saved me. Because we saved each other. because I want to spend the rest of my life being your partner in every sense of the word." "Yes," Sharon said, not hesitating, not needing time to consider. "Yes, absolutely yes." Rodney slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, while Deborah cheered, and the center's staff emerged from various offices to applaud and cry and celebrate the love story they'd all witnessed unfold. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in the center's community room, the same space where Sharon had given her first speech about resilience and second chances. No grand cathedral or expensive venue, just the place that meant everything to them both, filled with the families they'd helped and the staff who'd become their extended family. Maria stood as Sharon's maid of honor, Deborah as flower girl in a purple dress she'd picked herself. Vincent walked Sharon down the aisle, this scarred man who'd carried her sleeping daughter to safety, now giving away the woman who'd transformed his boss's life. The ceremony was simple and profound. They wrote their own vows, promising not perfection but presence, not salvation but partnership, not erasure of their pasts, but transformation of their futures. "I promise to see all of you," Sharon said, her hand in Rodney's. "The darkness and the light, the violence and the gentleness, and to love you not despite the complexity but because of it. I promise to build with you, to protect with you, to create the safety we both needed and make sure others can find it too." Rodney's voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to let you see all of me, to trust that love doesn't require perfection or redemption, only honesty and choice. I promise to be Deborah's father in every way that matters, to protect you both not by keeping you locked away, but by giving you the freedom to thrive. I promise to build legitimate legacies instead of dark empires, to use power for protection instead of destruction, to become the man you see when you look at me." They kissed as husband and wife, and the room erupted in celebration. A community built on shared trauma and collective healing, witnessing two of their own choose joy after surviving so much pain. 6 months after the wedding, Sharon taught her Thursday evening self-defense class, while Rodney watched from the back of the room. Deborah perched on his shoulders, her small hands tangled in his hair. "Higher, Daddy," Deborah commanded, and Rodney adjusted his grip, lifting her a few inches more while she giggled. "Daddy." The word had come naturally about a month after the wedding, when Deborah had asked if Mr. Rodney was her daddy now, since Mommy had the same last name. Rodney had frozen, looked to Sharon for permission, and, when she'd nodded through tears, he'd knelt down and told Deborah that he'd be honored to be her father if she wanted him to be. Now it was just normal. Daddy made pancakes on Saturday mornings. Daddy did the best dragon voice for bedtime stories. Daddy had taught her how to play chess, and always let her win exactly half the time because real confidence comes from earning victories, not receiving them. Sharon finished demonstrating the final technique and dismissed the class, watching the women file out with a little more confidence in their step, a little more certainty that they had the right to defend themselves and their children. "Good class," Rodney said, settling Deborah back on the ground so she could run to Sharon. "Mommy, you were so cool!" Deborah wrapped her arms around Sharon's waist. "When I grow up, I want to teach people how to be strong just like you." Sharon knelt down, pulling her daughter close. "You're already strong, baby. You survived something terrible and came out the other side still believing the world could be good. That's the strongest thing of all." As they locked up the center and walked to the car together, Sharon, Rodney, and Deborah, a family built from trauma and choice and fierce determination, Sharon reflected on the price of redemption. It had cost her shattered legs and months of agony. It had cost Rodney his certainty that violence was his only language. It had cost them both their old identities, the people they'd been before the alley, before the rescue, before they'd chosen to rebuild together. But what they'd gained was immeasurable. Safety. Purpose. Love that wasn't conditional on gratitude or circumstance, but built on genuine partnership and mutual recognition. A daughter who knew she was protected by two people who'd fight like hell to make sure she never had to make the choices they'd been forced to make. The Catherine Stidham Community Center had helped 73 families in its first year, providing medical care to over 200 children, preventing 38 predatory loans, and connecting dozens of parents to jobs that paid living wages. Every life touched was a victory against the system that had failed Sharon and Rodney both. As they drove through the city toward home, their home now, transformed from fortress to family sanctuary, Sharon took Rodney's hand and felt the platinum band on her finger, the symbol of promises kept and futures chosen. "Thank you," she said quietly, as Deborah sang along to the radio in the back seat. "For what?" Rodney glanced over, his expression soft with contentment. "For finding me in that alley. For believing I was worth saving. For letting me save you back." Rodney lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Thank you for teaching me that redemption doesn't come from destroying our demons, but from choosing to create something beautiful despite them." They pulled up to the house, where lights blazed in welcome, where Maria had dinner, waiting, where Deborah's artwork covered the refrigerator, and family photos lined the hallways. Not a fortress anymore. Not a temporary refuge. Home. Sharon had thought that night in the alley was her ending. The moment where her story concluded in violence and defeat and her daughter's lifetime of trauma. She'd been wrong. It was the beginning. The night she learned that strength sometimes looks like accepting help. That love can grow from the darkest circumstances. That redemption is possible even for people who believed themselves beyond saving. That two broken people can build something whole together. Something that protects not just themselves, but countless others who desperately need someone to believe in second chances. As they walked into their home, Deborah running ahead to tell Maria about Mommy's cool self-defense moves, Sharon and Rodney paused in the doorway, looking back at the life they'd built from wreckage and will and fierce determination. "We did it," Sharon whispered. "We did," Rodney agreed, pulling her close. "We survived. We healed. We built something worth protecting." And in that moment, standing on legs that had been shattered and rebuilt, in a home that had transformed from prison to paradise, beside a man who'd learned that violence wasn't his only language, and a daughter who would grow up knowing she was worth protecting, Sharon Collins Stidham finally believed what she'd spent a lifetime doubting. She was enough. She was strong. She was loved. She was home. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.